Immediate fallout of the Israel-Gaza war. A sea route that is critical to global trade, the Suez Canal is facing its biggest and deadliest threat in recent history. There have been more than 25 attacks on commercial ships plying the Red Sea since the war began 3 months ago. Who are the rebels behind the attacks? The Iran-backed Houthis. Well, maritime escalations are at their peak, with the US and UK launching an all-out attack on the Houthi rebels by air and sea. Well, the spate of attacks could have a devastating impact on global trade. These commercial ships that ply the Suez Canal represent more than 12% of global trade and nearly 10% of the world's oil demand. Global oil prices as a result of these strikes have already begun to spike, and this happened after the US and UK strikes yesterday. Now, this route is extremely critical for India too, with 65% of India's oil imports passing through this route. But let's look at the latest escalation. The US and UK launching an all-out attack on Houthi rebels. What does this really mean? What are the immediate ramifications? Here's a report.
The latest in concerted joint strikes by the US and UK against the Yemen's Houthi fighters. Air, ship and submarine strikes on Thursday after repeated warnings to the rebels. On target are weapons storage, air defense and logistic facilities of the rebels who have continued to attack ships in the Red Sea despite the warnings.
US and UK forces were able to down 18 one-way attack UAVs, 2 anti-ship cruise missiles, and 1 anti-ship ballistic missile when these weapons were launched towards international shipping lanes where dozens of merchant vessels were operating.
The strikes are the first on Yemeni territory since 2016 and also marked the first military intervention by the US in Yemen. The Houthi military claims lives have been lost and Iran warns of retaliation.
The raids have led to martyrdom of 5 and injuries to 6 others from the members of our armed forces.
The strikes against the Houthis came as US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken wrapped up his visit to the Middle East.
We've been focused on a number of key objectives. First, preventing the conflict from spreading. Second, getting more humanitarian assistance into people who need it. 3, increasing protection for civilians. 4, getting hostages out. And finally, continuing to support Israel in its efforts to make sure that October 7th can never happen again, and so that this conflict can end.
It is not necessary for the court to come to a final view on the question of whether Israel's conduct constitutes genocide.
Meanwhile, South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice, accusing it of genocide in Gaza, and urged the top UN court to halt the war.
Israel has a genocidal intent against the Palestinians in Gaza.
Something Israel strongly denies.
To weaponize the term genocide against Israel in the present context does more than tell the court a grossly distorted story.
South Africa's landmark case accuses Israel of committing the genocide in breach of the 1948 Genocide Convention. With Vishal Vivek, Usama Shah for NDTV.
And well, Derek Grossman is with us, of course, a senior defense analyst, somebody who watches this region very, very closely. Mr. Grossman, how do you look at the attacks on the Red Sea, on these commercial ships? What ramifications do you think it will have for global trade?
Of course, the strikes that we saw by the US and UK on the Houthi rebels in Yemen, it's very concerning because the Houthis are supported by Iran, and it risks the possibility of a greater conflict within the Middle East, which is going to have ramifications, obviously, for everyone in that region, but also globally, because it could bring Iran and Israel, as well as the U.S. And potentially countries into armed conflict with each other. And of course, as you mentioned, there's the global trade aspect, right? So you have the Houthis firing at ships that are going that are moving along a major sea route. And so the United States with several other countries have decided to work collectively to secure that sea route. And this is all about the U.S. trying to maintain some measure of peace and stability in the region. But of course, when you take action an armed group, it also raises the possibility of greater armed conflict. So it really is a careful balancing act that Washington, as well as other countries, must play.